I'm Sean Fennessy, and welcome to a very special pre-Academy Awards reel that we've put together. It's been an amazing awards season, and 2025 was an amazing year for movies. On The Big Picture, we were very fortunate to speak to several of the nominees for the 98th Academy Awards, and so what we've put together for you is a little compilation of some of the best conversations I had oriented around the inspirations for the films that are nominated. You'll hear from the filmmakers, the actors, the writers, and more. Check it out. It definitely does feel like a second half of your life movie, you know, and I feel like it will resonate more deeply with people who are like, am I at the end of this, or is the end coming closer? And obviously the film sets that up too for Hart's life.
The film itself is a final act.
Yes.
But Larry Hart didn't make the transition into the second half of his life. You know, I see that with some of my friends. You know, you have to keep growing and you have to keep changing and adapting and maintain your curiosity and maintain your health and these things that require a certain vigilance to weather the vicissitudes of life, you know, and Larry didn't make that turn. And I do think that that's haunting to people like us who dream of doing this at 80. And my brain is, since I was young, my brain is, why is Stoppard so great in his 80s? Why is Dylan still making relevant music? What happened to so many? Why did they lose? Why did this filmmaker? Why is his first three movies amazing? What is it? Is it them? Is it their instrument, or is it the times losing interest? And my brain is fascinated by that.
Or it's the old personal demons. We're watching an alcoholic kind of put himself on the bench. You know,
that's for sure.
Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
So a lot of the people you go, what happened? It's like, they didn't help themselves.
Do you have any fears about the time running out or not being able to do all the things that you want to do?
I don't. Illogically so.
Do you?
Well,
I definitely feel like I'm motivated to just keep doing what I'm doing. But
one of the other things is that you don't give the responsibility of your own creativity to anybody else.
Right.
Meaning the industry could very well just totally dismiss both of us at the.
I feel like it has, that's not.
But it wouldn't stop you from making things. It would never. I mean, I remember somebody said that about Paul Schrader. If you put him in jail, he'd come out with a movie.
He would write it. He would have
and that's the way I feel about Rick. It's like that's not gonna. You don't even need the world to care. You're going to do it. And I always feel if you left me alone, I would do something. I don't put that much weight on people's responses to the work. I love, obviously I love a compliment. I love it. And I live for it, but it's not my main motivator.
I mean, that really defines our 30+ year collaboration. It's like we both are excited. We always have stories we're trying to tell, characters we love. We're exchanging ideas. Some things become a potential movie, others don't.
I see I have a lot of young people in my life, and I see them getting absolutely sick of manipulated images, of stupidity, they're getting tired of short attention span theater. It's not like we're going to rebel from a lot of what's happening, I think politically, emotionally, artistically. We all operate in an interconnective community way, it was funny, I got to see, there was, Scorsese produced a documentary. He was giving a talk back, and he was talking about the early period of his career and how he just thought, oh God, everybody's overusing the word masterpiece. Every damn movie's a masterpiece. And he's like, it was. Like, I was living through this amazing 10
looking
years.
Back, a lot of masterpieces.
Like, oh, wow, yeah, Bergman, Godard, Hal Ashby. He's like, actually, these
your friends, your godfathers,
these were phenomenal films. And that happens because a collective thing is happening, and not just with the artistic community, with the audiences. The audiences have to care about David Bowie. They have to think that's cool. They have to be interested in John Cage. They have to be interested in Frank Zappa. They have to be interested in Miles Davis. They have to be like, and that makes the money people want to make more of it. And there's this, so we operate together, and I do feel there more and more as we kind of get depleted. I think what you're talking about is kind of an exhale. But the good news about that is there's about to be a giant inhale. And I do feel it coming. I feel it politically too.
Do you feel that?
Yeah, I mean, I just know film history. Let's just talk about film, because I think that was is it over? Do films matter in the culture and all that stuff? And we've always been under existential threat. If you really look at the last 70 years, there's threats. And I think whenever technology and art and commerce intertwine, there's a lot of jobs threatened. There's a lot of challenges always. So it has our little amygdalas going all the time. It was like TV. Oh, that's the end of that. That's the end of that. Oh, video is going to kill, so it's always been that. But, there's a bigger threat in the world, and it could be the thing that interrupts what you're talking about, the audience and the thing and what people want. We have an adversary now that is coming after our attention and consciousness in a way that hasn't before. So I think that's the great interrupter. That's what up to each individual to kind of stifle that, silence
to rebel
that.
against the
Yeah,
algorithm.
you got to save yourself. You got to admit you're addicted. We just need a group session. No, you have to put that down. You have to. But I'm seeing it a lot. I'm my film society in Austin. I saw these young people. Just when you thought, oh, they grew up watching, YouTube and TikTok, and audiences full at the theater of young people in their 20s, really discovering movies, the history movies, current movies, out in the lobby, talking about them, having a drink with friends, community. So each individual has to kind of save themselves by participating in community and humanity and art and giving a shit and just realizing, oh, that's a fun life. Wherever you fall in the spectrum of art or just appreciator of art or consumer, it's more fun to be engaged with art and other people. And, so that's how you save your own soul. But there is an opposition. There is an enemy out there who wants something else from you.
Leo, you haven't played a dad in very many movies, and certainly not having an older child. And I have a young daughter. This is an amazing father-daughter movie, and I think we'll hit a lot of father-daughters very heavy. But I'm curious, what conversations you guys had about the father-daughter relationship and kind of getting into the mind state of somebody trying to take care of a kid at that age.
I have played dads before. Revenant, I think I played a father. Revolutionary Road, Inception, movies like that. But yeah, this centrifuge of this entire story is this sort of makeshift father that is, trying to relate to his, daughter, and that's the driving force of this entire movie. When I was thinking about this character in movies to watch, we watched a lot of different movies, not based around a father-daughter dynamic, but I remember watching, what did we watch? Running on Empty,
Yeah.
which was, sort of revolutionary parents running with their children. We watched Battle of Algiers. I think I remember watching a lot of Dog Day. I watched Dog Day Afternoon a lot because that urgency of the great Al Pacino in that movie with those phone calls, the franticness of trying to get your loved one back at all odds was a big influence. But
did you watch Lion in the Winter?
I watched Lion in the Winter too.
That has nothing to do with it, but it's great because it has the best acting ever in a movie with Peter O'Toole and Katharine Hepburn, and they can be so gigantic and so fun and so hammy, but like that switch to an intimate thing that's razor's edge. And I'd like that as an idea. The movie is very different, but in similar ways that we could go from really big and broad and all over the place to, keep it real and make it really,
Is that something you would
else.
literalize when you were preparing to make the movie or even on set?
No, I don't think so. I think those things just sort of come because you're feeling your way through it and you kind of, you just try to play loose and see where it goes. And, most of the times you feel good and you go, this feels right. I will not say in 6 months when we're looking back at it's right, but we have to keep moving forward. And so this instinctually feels pretty good. Or from time to time, you do something, and at least within 24 hours, you go, maybe we should revisit that. And that can happen too from time to time.
I know that your wife handed you a book.
That's right.
That is like the origin of
The end of Uncut Gems, like towards the end-ish of Uncut
What was
Gems.
the book?
During production, she was at like a thrift store and she saw a dime store book, that said Confessions of a Table Tennis Champion and Hustler. So it was the and Hustler. She knew I loved table tennis. She knew my uncle played, in the older days, which was always unique. Even people don't think about table tennis as having a past or a history. I remember when the players came onto the set, the Wembley set, one player was like emotional. I said, "Why are you so emotional?" He goes, "It's dignifying the sport. Look at this. It's an arena full of people and the barriers are made of wood. Wood's expensive. The floor is wood and history is dignifying. That's why we all need to know history and understand it. It teaches us where we are now."
Did your uncle play in that kind of
My
environment?
uncle played at Lawrence's.
Wow.
He knew all these guys. He knew the author of that book was a guy named Marty Reisman. And what that book did is it opened my eyes to this group of people in New York, these guys from the Lower East Side who had no place to sleep on Wednesday, but you'd find them in a palatial hotel in Budapest on Saturday. And they were like this X class, and they had a very specific vision for themselves. And yet they were total jokers, but they were all super intellects, autodidacts, and complete. Like you have the Beats 40 blocks south. They had their dreams. There was glory. There were museums for their dreams or publishers. There's no, well, pun intended, there's no real arena for the destination of the dreams of these guys. And that element of the book and also the footnote of history element from that book was interesting to me. When I talked to my Uncle Johnny, I was like, "You played with Dickie Miles, didn't you?" He's like, "Dickie Miles, who was the best. He used to come over for Shabbat dinner and then they would clear the table, and they'd put books and they would play ping pong on the table afterwards." He's like, "I went to Lawrence's." George Gervin plays Lawrence. Lawrence's was the first Black-owned business in the Times Square district. That's historical. That's historical. He told me that when you would show up there, it felt like an orphanage. It was like, who are all these people? What's going on here? Everyone's betting money. They're all super serious, but also incredible jokers who will bet about who can throw a peach higher on the street, and like they'll go down and they'll find a mark and everyone will come and steal all the person's money. But they're like guys who could, describe relativity to you.
Yeah.
And there would be gangsters, like there was these holes above table number 6, and they were the bullet holes from an attempt on Legs Diamond's life. But there was like 6 balls and they all missed. And so it became lucky table number 6. And it was a speakeasy for Legs. So there's this interesting history there. And when I started to hear him talk to me about the footnote quality of at least Lawrence's, and then I see, in Tim, and I obviously used to get into this world, and then there's a 10-volume set by Tim Boggin, who wrote The History of Table Tennis, and there's a lot of great stories in there as well that are inspiring. You start to discover, the story of Aloshi Ehrlich, who survived the Holocaust, and that Honeybee story is a true story. My instinct originally when I first watched this, footage from 1940s, and I decided to set it, I was like, I'm going to listen to the energy of these players. I'm going to put I Have the Touch by Peter Gabriel. And when I put it on, it just kind of worked. There was a feeling of that these people were ahead of their time in a weird way. That there was a modernity to seeing them against a different time period. And then I start to ask myself, why? Why did I was attracted to the 80s? And you start to, read up on it, and you realize like, wow, this is the first time culture was eating its own tail. 80s were doing the 50s. Back to the Future is literally doing it. It's here in the 80s, and they go back to the 50s. You're seeing it in fashion. You're seeing it in music. Rock and roll is coming to being in the 50s, and you're taking blues music, sad expressions of sad souls, putting a beat to it. So all of a sudden, it's propulsive. In the 80s, you're doing this new wave movement. That's melancholic music, but it's dance music almost. So there was a lot of interesting parallels between the two. And Reagan resurrecting the American dream. The 50s were coming out of victory. The 80s are coming out of defeat. You're trying to chase the opulence again. And, you start to, Dan and I start to talk about the music, and we talk about Marty. And the very early version of the script at the very end of the credits, you saw Marty in the 80s. He's watching a Tears for Fear concert. It was very, very at one point.
I've heard about this. Yes,
and he's there, and
I won't spoil what I have heard about it.
And he's listening. Oh yes, yeah. There was one little line that even the studio's like, "Hold on, what is this a mistake? This one little sentence at the very, very end." But it wasn't a mistake, and actually it was one of those ideas that's so bad that it could be good. But
you will talk about it, I'm sure, at some point. I believe in it. That's what I'll tell you.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, without, I think corporate colonialists and that beginning of like passive colonialism too, there was a lot of people like that. There were a lot of, without spoiling it, there were a lot of ghoulish people.
Yes. We're feeling it to this very day, this literal very day in America.
Completely.
Yeah.
I think we're feeling the 80s again, very much so. Even the idea of dream big, our campaign.
Did he tell you what he wanted the world to look like? What is a call like that when you talk to a filmmaker? Are they telling you, here's what I see, or what can you bring to it? What's in the material discussion?
Well, Josh was born in the 80s. I was born in the 40s. I lived in New York on the Lower East Side in the 60s when I was going to school there. And so I had some ideas, he had some ideas. We started looking at pictures together from street photographers of the time. He found a beautiful documentary film of Orchard Street from 1954, I think.
Okay.
And a combination of that and talking about it and wanting to make it very real. So it works out that I love to do documentaries. It's like when I was doing The New World, I really wanted to make a documentary about Pocahontas, but sometimes you're not allowed to do that because she was 9 years old, naked, and
right. The truth of it is not quite adaptable.
Right.
Yes.
They won't let you do a lot of stuff that's real. But Josh was open to everything.
Okay.
And Darius Kanji, our cinematographer, he approached it. And we really, Adam Willis, the decorator, and I tried to recreate the 1950s New York so that it was more like a documentary than a theatrical film. Since I've grown up in the business, a lot of times when I look at period films, I go, well, this looks like a period film. Everybody's got the right clothes at the right time and it's perfectly designed, but real life is not that perfect. So in order to do a documentary, we looked sort of between the lines on photographs and stuff and found out really how grody it was. I mean, I lived in New York in the 60s and I'm on the Lower East Side, and it was so dirty because they burned coal. So coal dust was coming down all the time on the buildings, on the ground. Everything had a layer of black on it. And the people, they were just teeming. And there was not a lot of other excitement to do except be on the streets with your friends. So people were playing stickball on the streets. They were, they were shopping. They were bundled up. It's freezing cold. And the block that I lived on was Ukrainian. So it was like all these old, seemingly Russian type people, great restaurants, for $1.25, you have a big plate of whatever they eat, beef and potatoes and borscht and stuff. And I couldn't even finish a $1.25 plate back then. Subway was 15 cents. So you could go anywhere on Manhattan, 15 cents, and you could transfer and go to Brooklyn or whatever. And I remember at the time thinking, this is a bargain living in New York. So poor people could live in New York very successfully. And there was an excitement about it. It's changed now. In the 70s, they kind of started to clean it up. And now the buildings are washed out. I don't think they heat with coal anymore.
No.
And
it's expensive.
And it's expensive. And people are more refined. And the little shops that you could get stuff for bargains are now expensive. And a handbag, $250 or something. It's like crazy. And that was my shock when I first went to New York on this film, because I remembered it from the 60s. And we went down to Orchard Street with the location people had found a location there that I thought might work. And we went down to look at it. And all along the Lower East Side was graffiti on all the buildings that didn't exist in the 50s. They put like garage doors that rolled down so they could seal them up at night so nobody would steal anything. The signs had all been modernized. And at that time, because of COVID, they'd built restaurants out onto the street, and they still existed. So the streets were blocked with restaurants, or additions like rooms about the size of a train car. so I said, oh, it's even more work than I thought. So I was really getting scared. And that got me more excited about the film. What I would do normally when I go to locations is I'll start investigating behind light switches and molding or anything I can sort of a cabinet or take it away and see what's under it. And I find out the period wallpaper, the colors that they used back then. These tenement houses, a lot of times they would paint things bright color because it was so dingy. So that's what, introduced like the lime green in Timothy's room.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a chance to add some kind of light and joy to your, environment where you're living in a building with 12 other people and sharing a bathroom down the hall with everybody on that floor. It's fun. My wife's an actress, so I think about what you have to do as an actor to put yourself into a role. And I think as a designer, or at least the way my approach to have things more natural is I try to get into the life of the people, whatever time it is. I read a lot of journals, if I can find them, or stories that written by people at the time that have a sort of honest description. Look at paintings that were done at the time. And if it's new enough, if it's after 1860, I can look at photographs a lot of times. Now, it used to be people dressed up for photographs or brought all the furniture out of their house to have the photograph taken so they could show all they had. But by the 50s, it was so natural. People were being photographed unawares, by street photographers and cameras were ubiquitous. They're everywhere. And you just start investigating those like you're a detective.
So, I know you mentioned that Josh had discovered this documentary, but you're famed in your work for, inspiration from a painter like Hopper. Were there any artists who you looked at from this period of time for Marty Supreme, or was it entirely this documentary approach?
No, there were artists, some of them unknown because they're unimportant. I got a note from a fellow production designer who said, I was at the Met and saw a George Bellows photograph, in the ring, and I know you used that for inspiration. I said, well, I didn't, But then the next week, an article came out in the American Cinematographer, where Darius Kanji, a cinematographer, said, and I looked at the film of George Bellows.
Oh, interesting.
So, the production designer was right, but I was telling you the truth because I don't, there gets to a point in research, whatever time they give you, if it could be 2 weeks or 2 months, depending on your lead time, you try and bombard yourself with images and you don't even know what they are. I mean, I would just spend all day looking at stuff. I pinned stuff up that I liked, but then you have to leave it because you're not recreating photographs, you're not recreating paintings, you're dealing with the story and what the director wants. So then you have to work out of your gut. And that's exciting when you make that transfer. And you make decisions, and sometimes you don't even know why you make them, but you make them, and then later they resonate, you find out. And I was mentioned to you once before that I try to avoid designing stuff. I mean, Manuel Lubezki, my favorite cinematographer I've ever worked with, would say, if we do our job right, nobody else see it. And that's true. That's the same way I like to work, is that I don't want it to look like, oh, that's beautifully designed. I want it to be like, whoa, 1952.
Yes. Yes, we're in the place and the time. Jockey is seemingly a very personal movie. Your father was a jockey. I feel like you poured a lot of experience in that world into this. This is a slightly different exploration. It's 100 years ago, and it's a world. I don't know how familiar you are with the world of logging in the Pacific Northwest, but how do you make yourself an expert so that you can portray it?
It's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of research that went into it. The things I loved about the novella were actually the things that were very personal. I think in some ways of the things that Grenier is struggling with, of doing this thing that you love and this work that takes you far away from home while also wanting to be with your family. I experienced that as a filmmaker a lot and struggle with that. I was raised on a ranch, and my uncle was a logger, and I used to ride in the log trucks with him on the weekends. And there's a lot of this question of what is our responsibility to in our relationship with nature as people who live not over top of it, but really alongside of it. And then the nature of grief, like dealing, like a lot of us, like have dealt with some real like debilitating loss in my life. And that was a big thing. I think we started writing it on the tail end of COVID, and when like just life had completely changed for all of us. And there was a lot of that went into it, of just like trying to kind of figure out like, where do we go from here? And what does it look like? There was just so much about the book and reading the novella that felt not only that I could personally relate to in my own personal life, but that I felt like, even though it was telling this story of this guy who lived in the early part of the 20th century in the Pacific Northwest and was a logger, so much felt so pertinent to today, in terms of, this guy feeling like a relic of another time, even while he's still alive. Technology's passing him by. He doesn't know, how to kind of keep up with life. Life feels like it's moving faster and faster. Like all these things, it just felt like this really feels like maybe a really stunning way to talk about a lot of things we're going through today, through this lens of this character.
The narration in this film, to me, makes it very unusual because it does make it very literate and almost like literature. And I don't feel the structure of a traditional 3-act movie.
Yeah.
Because of the narration. But I was curious to hear you talk about writing it and kind of when to include it. The decision to use Will Patton, which is so inspired, and he's amazing.
He's incredible.
Keeps you like very emotionally tied to the work.
Yeah.
But can you just talk about why you included it in the way that you did?
Yeah, it was a few things that came from just the story itself. One was, you've got this character in Robert Grenier, who Joel Edgerton plays, who is a man of few words. And I wanted to portray this character as he is in the book, but also like thinking about like my dad, my grandfathers, and men like that who had very deep feelings and deep thoughts, but didn't always have the vocabulary to say it, And so that was one aspect of just having this character who you want to portray to an audience, that there's a very deep undercurrent running through there, and he's trying to figure out the world around him, and yet doesn't have the words to say, hey, I'm dealing with trauma and loss, and I don't know, like,
yes.
It breaks the character as soon as he starts doing that. And so that was one aspect. The other aspect was thinking about what was special about the novella and trying to bring that across. And part of the thing was just Dennis Johnson's voice, and he's got these like clever turns of phrase and this subtle kind of irony that he puts in at times that just makes the story come alive, even though it's so spare in terms of the fiction. It's so deep, and that's part of it is because of his voice, and just trying to pull that across in there. And then like, you don't want to do narration badly and be like, and he was sad that day.
Right, right.
And I thought about like the narrators from like Jules and Jim and Itu Mama Tambien, who are just like characters in their own right, and wanted this character to feel like if you like we're in some bar in a logging town late at night and some guy sits down next to you and is like, let me tell you about Robert Grenier after he's had a few beers, wanting it to feel like that, and that he can take asides, he can take these like tangents and talk about a comet for some reason. You're like, wait, what does that have to do with what we're talking about?
I love that. Yeah,
oh yeah, let's get back on track.
That's great. I mean, he really does feel like he is someone but just met and has a lot of things to share, which is a nice way to feel about the narrative. Instead of it being, if it was in Joel's voice and it was first person, you'd be like,
cheesy all of a sudden.
Exactly.
Yeah. If he's like, I was, 3 years old when this happened, and then it's all of a sudden we've felt it before. And I think that like taking that approach to every part of it, the structure, the way you set up shots, the way that like, I don't know, any scene between two characters go, and just trying not to do the thing that's expected with it. I think that like applies to the whole process.
I do think it makes young children reflect on their deepest feelings. One of the magic tricks of this movie. Yeah. Was that something you thought about when you were writing it, about trying to give kids access to a feeling they don't know how to put words to?
Not intentionally.
Not intentionally, yeah. I mean, to be honest, we wanted to just make a movie for ourselves, I mean, I think as a filmmaker, that's the first person that you make the movie for. Because, I don't know, you're going to be on this journey I was on this journey for 7 years, so I'm not going to invest 7 years of my life in somebody else's life, I guess. So yeah, like we made the film for ourselves, and for me, it was just all ages of myself. You know, I wanted to see characters like this in a movie like this growing up, and so it was for my young self, like 7, 8-year-old self, the 12-year-old self that loved K-pop and had to kind of hide it. And this was like, yes, now we can celebrate this. I was right all along. And then for my, you know, something version of myself, age redacted, as a filmmaker and a mom and, you know, a grown woman wanting to kind of explore a deeper theme in movies like this, having worked in the animation industry for a long time. And, you know, we tend to kind of cater those films a little younger to children. And we are firm believers, as well as like Sony Pictures Animation, and trying to push the boundaries of what the animation medium can do and what kind of stories we tell. So yeah, I think we just wanted to like make a movie we wanted to see.
My daughter's here. She's 4.5. This is one of her favorite movies of all time. And I think one of the reasons why, even if this is subconscious, is that this is a movie, as a friend said to me before this screening started, about women just saying like, yeah, we'll do it ourselves. Which is, there's not a lot of movies about that either. And I know there are a lot of themes that you guys were thinking about as you were writing through, but that's one that seems to be really resonating. I was hoping you could maybe talk about writing that into the characters.
Yeah, I mean, one of the main parts of the initial pitch was just seeing female characters in a movie like this that I feel like we haven't seen. I've been in many story rooms where it's an entourage and there's 1 or 2 female characters out of 6 or 7, and we spend hours talking about how do we make our female characters pop, and I'm like, oh, I just hate that. And I've been in many rooms where I would suggest like, well, why don't we take the most interesting male character and make that one of the female characters, and then it's just silence in the room. And so when it came time to make a movie of my own, that's, you know, I wanted to just kind of like, you know, relieve that frustration, and this is the version of female characters that I want to see. You know, I feel like I am this kind of like I'm very silly and this, and I like to make dumb faces, but I'm also serious and emotional, and I just wanted to explore like what is the type of woman that I wanted to see, and so the task was how do we make 3 distinct female characters that are that. And so that was part of the initial pitch, and also it's a story about sisterhood. It's about found family and a friendship between these 3 girls, but it all and I truly believe true intimacy only comes when you are the most silly version of yourself with somebody else, and so that the kind of zaniness of the girls and being stupid. We like to use that word a lot in this movie. Like we wanted it to feel stupid, and I think there's power and confidence, you know, to be stupid is like, it takes a lot of courage, and to be that version of yourself in front of somebody else takes a lot of courage too. And so it wasn't just like for fun. It really, you know, brings the girls together, and we get to see that intimacy in a different way. So that was what was so important about the comedy of it.
Do you remember the first movie you saw?
The first film I saw, and I know this because my mother always told this story, it was a Tom and Jerry marathon right at the Saint Louis Cinema, which is one of the characters in The Secret Agent. And that movie palace opened in 1952. It's still open. It's one of the great movie palaces in the world, I think, today. It's absolutely intact and recently restored. And that's where I went to see my first film screening.
How old?
This was 1973, so I must have been 4, almost 5 years old.
Okay. So then take me back to 77 as a film goer then, since that's such a critical year for this film.
77 was a special, interesting year personally for me because we had a health crisis in the family. My mother, she had treatment for breast cancer at the time, and the family really tried to protect the two little kids, myself and my brother. I was 9 at the time. My brother was 7, and my younger uncle Ronaldo, he took us to the cinema many, many times, a crazy amount of times, basically to take us away from
an escape.
Yeah, from home. And that was an interesting moment because as a child, I wasn't really aware of what was happening, and I was going to see lots of movies in the downtown area in Recife, which I think explains my previous film, Pictures of Ghosts. Of course, I grew up and became a cinephile, and then I did journalism and became a film critic and, of course, a filmmaker. But at the time, it felt like a real discovery, not only of films, but also of, the downtown area. I remember the smells and the colors, and film going was a big part of being downtown. I think the cinemas attracted thousands and thousands of people every week, and I have many memories of that time. And the interesting thing is, not only do I remember the films I saw at the time, but I also remember the films I never saw at the time. But I would see the posters and the lobby cards, and that really played with one's imagination, because at the time, of course, we had no internet, and the only way to access films was in the cinema or maybe on television, but also outside the, in the hall, in the lobby, and in the windows on the streets. So that's how I first saw, The Omen, which was rated 18 in Brazil at the time, and Jaws, which I only finally saw in the early 80s. And so much of that iconography is very much part of my life,
It's part of this film too, clearly.
And it's part of this film, yeah. There are many references of film posters in the background, and I like to say that for Pictures of Ghosts, which is a documentary and a film essay, the São Luís cinema is shot like a character. But in this film, The Secret Agent, I think it's shot like an actor, as if it was acting.
But watching this movie, one of the things that I love so much about it is this unusual blend of genre, almost exploitation convention, and in this film, a lot of history, a lot of personal reflection, and then this sense of absurdism. That's like a very delicate balance between all these ingredients.
I think life in society can be absurdist, can feel like an exploitation movie sometimes. Just look at the news, and so many nasty incidents and so much violence in the world. So I think when you sit down to write a script, it can go to many places. And I guess I grew up watching all kinds of genre cinema. I'm a huge fan of, Carpenter, for example, John Carpenter.
Feel that in Baccarat deeply.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
De Palma. I think Spielberg plays an important part in my years as a young cinephile also. But of course, I think a lot about, Brazilian cinema from the 1970s, and Australian cinema, of course. Something like Wake in Fright, I think, was very much in the back of my mind when I was writing the opening 10-minute opening sequence, and even shooting it also. So, yeah, I really believe that. For example, I really love documentaries, but I think you can be very truthful doing fiction. And I even think that some fiction work can even be more truthful than some documentaries. Not all of them, but some of them.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that you can use artifice and you can use genre conventions, but still come up with an idea which is very honest and very truthful about life and about people and about the world. And this is something that I keep getting as a reaction to some of my films and to The Secret Agent. I mean, it's a narrative fiction, and it's not based on real life incidents. But there is a logic to it which I think is very truthful about Brazil and about the world and about the passing of time.
Why did you make this movie?
Why? Okay. I think, well, it's a complicated question, but I, like many people, discovered this sport watching this TV documentary show called Drive to Survive on Netflix during the pandemic. And the first season of that show, they did not have the participation of the top teams. So they were kind of forced to focus on the last place teams. And to me, that was fascinating to hear the story of a team that goes out and loses every week, to hear the story of a rookie that no one had ever heard of that had spent his whole life trying to get to this point only to find himself in a car that was not as fast as everyone else, so was not going to be able to perform and might lose his seat. And to me, that was the first thing. And then the sport itself is really interesting because it's constructed in a way where your teammate often becomes your biggest rival. And that is because every team builds its own car in Formula One. They don't buy these things. You literally have to build your own car and race it. So they build 2 cars for their 2 drivers. So that means the only person who's driving the exact same machine as you is your teammate. And that, therefore, you have a very clear way to see who is better.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of conflict is great for drama. And then I sent an email to the only person I knew in Formula One who happened to be the 7-time world champion, Sir Lewis Hamilton, who I knew was interested in film. That's a whole nother story. And I said to him, I'm fascinated with this world. I'd love to investigate making a film in this world. Would you help me? Because I want it to be as authentic as possible, and you obviously know it better than anyone. And he said yes. So he invited me to the Austin Grand Prix in 2021. I stepped into the Mercedes garage. He gave me full access, and I watched his team put a car together from parts and pieces in front of me. They assembled it, and then he climbed inside it and went out and, set a lap record or whatever he did that day. And I was like, this is insane. I have never seen anything like this. So I really came to it as an outsider going, wow, this is a fascinating world. This is something that I think would be fun to see on a big screen. And so with Lewis, and then I went to Jerry, and then Brad Pitt, and, knew I would have to assemble a kind of perfect team to pull this off, because there's a reason racing movies don't get made. They're very expensive. There's no IP. So I was going to have to create a very compelling case to all the studios that this was worth their time and money to make this. And so we went out, we pitched to 9 studios, and we got 9 offers. And Apple, to me, was the most compelling. And we joined forces with them, and now here we are almost 4 years later.
When a script hits your desk, what are you looking for? What is it that excites you in a story?
Well, I'll start by saying, all of these scripts until recently, I'm either, involved as a writer or kind of found the original material, or they were all really long process of, development. So I was involved with the screenwriting for many years. So in that sense, this is even more exceptional. It's the first time that I receive a screenplay, and I think that it's, almost ready to go. Of course, I had to do a little bit of work with Will just to get it more to my sensibility and, feel more comfortable. And make it aligned with my vision of the film, but it was like a, very short process. And I felt immediately from the beginning that it would, work because already the screenplay was incredible. So, and what it was like, it's difficult to say. Like, I guess one thing, the less profound is like it was different to what I've done before. But then, it was something that I read, and I read it like in one go, and I found it, entertaining and suspenseful and complex and, very funny, but also like dealing with, a lot of darkness, a lot of issues around humanity and human nature, which always interests me, and done in a quite different way, in a contained way. So yeah, it just got me excited immediately. And I immediately sent it to Emma Stone the same night that I read it. It was so much of an immediate reaction, I guess.
Whenever Jesse's on his bike or Emma is just kind of walking briskly through a space, that it feels like the camera is very wide and that there's like this sense of impending doom, like someone might come up behind them at any moment.
Yeah.
But how do you avoid, when you impose those rules, the film like feeling too schematic, feeling too mannered? Do you think about that?
Yeah, which I think I don't mind. I like the aspect of a certain construct to be obvious, and I like to mix that with other things. Like, there can be a very as you say, like conscious construct around how the film is recorded, but then like there's these quite realistic, although I don't really love the term, performances from the actors, or the environment is like really dirty and real, and then you have this other layer of sound or music that's over the top and super dramatic. And I think all of these things, by combining all these different layers, you create this tone, this tonality, which is, different to its parts. So that's why I'm interested in. But then, of course, if you see it and analyze it, you can see the structure of that. And I don't know, like I find something interesting about like watching a film, getting lost in it, and then something reminding you that you're watching a film.
Can you talk a little bit about balancing tone? Because this struck me as perhaps ironically one of your funniest movies, and the subject matter is obviously incredibly intense, and it seems difficult to balance tone. How do you think about doing that when you're making a film?
ببین هر اتفاقی که در روزانه هر چیزی که اتفاق میفته نهایت بعضی وقتا لبخندم توش هست دیگه.
Anything that happens in the daily life, usually at the end of the day you have some smiles going on too.
همین مصاحبه که الان داریم با هم میکنیم اولش سعی کردیم الکی هم که شده یه خنده‌ای داشته باشیم.
In this very interview that we're doing now, at the beginning we tried to smile even if we were faking it, but we tried to make some laugh.
که بتونیم شنونده ها رو با خودمون همراه کنیم حداقل.
Just so we could bring the audience along.
Speak for yourself. I'm not faking.
برای خودتون صحبت کنیم. من الکی نخندیدم.
حالا پس این مسئله تو خودش ادغام شده، تو یک واقعیت ادغام شده.
So this tone of laughter, smiles, humor has been combined into the film itself.
یعنی همین رئالش میکنه.
And this makes it in the genre of realism.
و باور کردنیش میکنه.
And it makes it believable.
خب حالا چطور توقع داریم تو فیلم نباشه؟
So how would we expect it to not be in the film?
همون رو قابل تحمل تر میکنه.
It also makes the subject matter more tolerable.
به خصوص که من واقعا قصدنم میخواستم تا 20 دقیقه آخرین اتفاق بیفته.
Especially because I really did want this to be in the film, this tone of laughter, to be in the film until the very last 20 minutes of the film.
میخواستم 20 دقیقه اول واقعا تأثیرگذار باشه. 20 دقیقه آخر.
I wanted the last 20 minutes to be very influential.
اونقدر که وقتی تماشاگر از سینما میره بیرون هنوز به فیلم فکر میکنه.
To the point that when the audience leaves the theater, they would still be thinking about the film.
واسه یه تفاوتی باید ایجاد میکردم، فیلم یه دست نمیشد.
So I had to make some kind of a difference in tones in film, and so that the film would not be monotonous.
و حالا تصور کنید که اصلا اون قسمت ها این طنز رو نداشت، این لبخند رو نداشت.
Imagine those parts that had humor, without smiles.
ما تو 20 دقیقه آخر شما فقط یه دستی میدیدید، انقدر تاثیرگذار نبود.
And that way the film would be monotonous until the last, also in the last 20 minutes, and it wouldn't have the impact that it does now.
چون هیچ تنوع لحنی چیزی نداشتش.
Because there was no difference in tone.
I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about the difference between fact and fiction and our sense of what is really happening and what not. Your last few films are exploring the balance between what's real and not real. This film, that's also part of the character's pursuit. Did the work on those movies inform writing this movie?
مسلماً اینطوری هستش.
Of course they did help.
ببین وقتی شما خب هر فیلمی نهایتاً واقعیت محض نیستش که شما دارید القای واقعیت میکنید.
No film is pure reality. You're only inculcating reality.
یعنی شما میایید از واقعیت ها الهام میگیرید، بعد اونو تو تخیل خودتون میبرید، دوباره به واقعیت برمیگردونید.
A filmmaker gets inspired by realities, then the filmmaker brings those inspirations into their imagination, develops it in their imagination, and then brings it back into another form of reality.
و تو این بازی که میشه سعی میکنید القای واقعیت کنید.
And in this game, you try to inculcate reality.
در واقع این داستان اصلا اتفاق نیفتاده.
In fact, this story never happened.
ولی تو تخیل شما اتفاق میفته.
It just happens in your imagination.
اما بر اساس چی؟ بر اساس یه شواهدای عینی.
But based on what? Based on real references.
یا بر اساس تخیلی که تو قبلا تجربه کردی.
Or based on imagination that you have had before.
چشم تو رو بستن، تو رو روبروی نیمتری دیوار نشوندن، یه قلم خودکار بهت دادن، حالا یکی داره همش پشت سرت راه میره و سوال میکنه یا سوال مینویسه.
And based on experiences that you have had before, such as you're being blindfolded in the prison, someone walking behind you and you hearing their sound of footsteps and them giving you a pen and a paper and asking you questions.
و تو فقط داره حس شنواییت بیشترین کارایی رو میده.
And now it's just your auditory sense that is working at its peak.
و از روی این صدا داری فکر میکنی، خیال میکنی که این چند سالشه، چه شکلیه.
You're only reconstructing reality based on the sounds you hear. You're thinking, how old is this person behind me? What does he look like?
حالا اینو من بیرون ببینم میتونم بشناسمش یا نه.
If I see him outside, would I recognize him?
ببینید خود بازی خود شروع شده.
So this game has already started.
و وقتی هم که حالا میخوای در مورد همین مسئله برسی دیگه این بازی شدت بیشتری میگیره.
And when you write about the same issue, then this game becomes increased and highlighted.
When you were in prison, did you take very specific notes so that you could find a way to reproduce or reimagine these experiences in your work?
اصلا اون موقع به فکر فیلم ساختن نبودم.
I really was not thinking about making films in prison.
اصلا در تخیلم هم نبود که
It was not even in
یه
my
روزی بخوام فیلم بسازم.
It was not even on my mind that I would one day make a film.
بلکه فقط میخواستم روز بگذره.
I just wanted the time to pass.
با هم دیگه صحبت کنیم، درد دل کنیم، تجربیاتمون رو بگیم.
We were talking with one another. We were having empathy for each other. We were talking about our experiences as pastime.
و این همینطوری ادامه پیدا میکرد و این بیرون از زندان بود که حالا تو فکر میکنی باید یه کاری بکنی.
This kept continuing, and it was only outside prison that you kept thinking you have to do something.
و اونم به خاطر همون اینکه اون مدت با یه سری آدم زندگی کردی و حالا نمیتونی فراموششون کنی.
And that was because of the fact that I had lived with a number of people for some time in prison and I could not forget them.
یه گوشه ذهنت اشغال شده و هی میخوای اینو و هی بیرون بریزی.
They had occupied somewhere in my mind and I just wanted to let go of those experiences.
یا یک بار سنگینی رو دوشته که میخوای اینو به یه جور زمین بگذاری.
Or I just wanted to unload a very heavy burden that was on my shoulders.
بار سنگینی که فکر میکنی تو بیرون هستی، اونا اون تو هستن.
And it was the burden of thinking that I am outside and my friends are still in prison.
حالا تو باید یه کاری بکنی.
And I realized I have to do something.
و چون کاری جز فیلم سازی بلد نیستی، حالا میگه خب در موردشون فیلم میسازم.
And because I knew nothing other than filmmaking, then I thought I'm going to make a film about them.
I was wondering what was going on in your life when you guys got together to start talking about sentimental value.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's interesting. What was going on? First of all, we'd made Worst Person in the World. So, as always, you try to accept that there's a kind of an anxiety for failure in the room of creating something from scratch like we do every time. And since The Worst Person had had a good ride and people had seen it, and, you know, it was a film that I felt met people on the right premise. People talked back to me about it in a way where I thought, hey, you know, I think we talked about something here. That was okay. Then, of course, we thought, what are people going to expect from us? And we try to get rid of those notions because it's not very creatively stimulating to work from that place of, you know, what do they expect? So what had happened was that I'd had 2 kids and Eskil has had children for a while. Our parents are still alive. And almost like in the old friendship that we have, we start talking about stuff from life. And then we have all these other ideas of cooler films we want to make. But then actually, how can we make it interesting and cool and specific to talk about family dynamics and stuff like that? So I think that's kind of what happened.
So there is something related to that too, which is that it felt like, you know, you've been making films for a long time, but it felt like The Worst Person in the World got into the culture more, you know, Academy Award nominations, probably more exposure to Hollywood than some of your films have gotten in the past. How much did that influence what you were writing? Because that's a significant strain too of Gustav's story and Elle's character. Did that particular experience on the last film inform that strain of the movie?
Honestly, I don't think so. I think first film we did, Reprise, was bought by Miramax and came out, and that's almost 20 years ago, man. So after that, I had the whole ride of meeting studios and reading scripts and trying to figure out as a young filmmaker who I was, and realizing then that even though I grew up adoring Hollywood movies and still do, it wasn't the place where I would feel the most free to do my thing. So I went back to Norway and made Oslo August 31st. And you know, so I've had a bit of that. And then since then, I have friends and colleagues, and I do come out to LA. I'm in LA now when we're talking. And I do feel that there's a beautiful dialectic between American and European cinema that's always been going back and forth and all that. So there's not skepticism, but it's more like this, how can I make a love letter to movies through making sentimental value, but still have fun and create some humor around the fact that on one level, an American actor that Elle plays in this one is kind of an outsider, and then she comes to Norway, which I think is more unusual than maybe making a story about a director going to Hollywood.
So like you, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and it's an interesting ride. It is like the most beautiful, wonderful thing, and it is a very emotionally dynamic. And obviously your daughter wasn't 4 at the time when you were making this film, but I'm curious about specifically what that unlocked or allowed you to be able to communicate, since you've got Inga and Renata's characters as the center, the focal point of this story.
Yeah, please forgive me for maybe this is a little bit of an abstract entry point into something you're asking about, but I think I want to talk about when you look at people developing kids, what we all come from. There is a sense that before the spoken language takes prominence, all these other modes of communications are at play. I'm sure you experienced that with your child as well, that dancing singing, hitting things rhythmically, drawing, all that stuff just happens. It's a part of expression. It's a part of getting into contact with the people around you. As it's almost, and it sounds a bit cheesy, but it's almost like we were all artists at some point before social conventions came and took us. So
I know exactly what you mean.
You know what I mean, right?
I do.
And also you sing to them to make them calm and sleep. And suddenly all these creative things come into play that has nothing to do with the business or with the function of art or any of that. It's just like being human is doing stuff like that, right? So I thought in this film where Eskil and I are talking about a creative family, not all of them. The younger sisters certainly stepped away from wanting to have anything to do with theater or movies or anything. And that we can talk about that later. But for some of these characters, art, making movies and theater is really important. And we were ashamed about writing that, Eskil and I. We were like, oh no, are we doing that again? But we realized that it gave us a key to talk about identity in a family and communication and lack of communication in a family, because these artistic expressions, Gustav's film that he wants to do with his daughter or films from the past gave us an insight into the characters. And I always thought at the end of the day that this is also a film about two women who have a very difficult relation to their father, somehow coming to terms with the fact that inside that father is a wounded child. I'm sorry, to say it straight, he is a man who comes from his own story and his own difficulties. And I think that's the only way to try to reach some sense of reconciliation, is to see the honesty about your parents' struggles. And that's a really hard place to go for most people. So when I look at the fact that Gustav as a child had a language which he'd certainly put into art in a beautiful way, but has no capacity to be socially available to his daughters in the social language. He's so clumsy. He says the wrong thing. He doesn't know how to be present with them. So I thought that dichotomy in life of this artist who actually seems to make really beautiful films but has no ability to be a great dad, that interested me. So that's that wounded child that's still at play in his art somehow, or something. That area interested me.
There's something really metatextual about Stellan portraying this character too, because of course he has children who are in the business, who are performers, who are artists. And so we as viewers, if we know about him, we bring that to the table. It did make me wonder though, like how you feel about the idea of your family getting into the arts, your kids. You told me before we started recording, your father was a sound designer. Like I presume there's a history of working in the arts in your family. Like how does that make you feel?
No, it's at times it's almost been a bit embarrassing. I mean, one grandfather was a painter, the other was a filmmaker, and I'm so inbred. It's ridiculous. It's so ironic, right? Like as a creative person, it's all about autonomy and individuality. And here I am just being served up from these obvious, family relations I come from. But here we are. That's what I do. I wasn't great at school. I filmed since I was a kid. I skateboarded. I filmed stuff with my friends all the way through from before I could write even. I had Super 8 and video cameras available that was privileged enough to be allowed to use. And so I'm just super grateful that I'm allowed to do this stuff. I love making movies. So it wasn't like a great plan or a choice. I kind of slid into it and here we are, But I also felt very comfortable on film sets as a child. The grown-ups didn't seem so scary and boring. They were playing. And I remember very well being on set with my dad and seeing, grown men lying in the mud trying to hold some light up as the wind was blowing while the take was rolling. And they were like down in the mud grabbing metal to try to keep it from not falling over during the shot. And kind of no one could make a sound. It was all silent, but it was kind of crazy and fun. And I was like, wow, these people really care about getting this shot done. How fun is that? So I'm sure I was very inspired by the process.
Was there a movie, maybe just for you or maybe between you and Ryan, that you discussed that was like the most useful reference for how it should look? The Thing.
Yeah. Well, I think it's for how it should look. He gave me we work in it's like, I don't feel like him and I are always like, this is how the movie should look. Mm-hmm. Like example A, because we work more from here, right? It finds itself a little bit differently because I'm so much a person that loves to work with the designer and the costume designer like Ruth and Hannah, and we're all such a collaborative team that we're building a space that feels real and is referenced from the 30s. Now it's more stylized, right? And then you take liberties there, but the thing is, like, one of his favorite films, he brought it up. I love that film, also Anamorphic. The tension it creates, it's moody, it's textured. So all of those, I draw from all of that, right? It's not that that's like the reference, but it's a reference for lots of different things. And then the photographs that he gave me were black and white photographs from Eudora Welty. That was my biggest draw. But it wasn't for lighting. Like, I feel like I have to create that with the designer a little bit because, we're making it out of nothing. She built every set.
So are those photographs like out of creating like a sense of reality or authenticity, or what is it that is it communicating?
I mean, it's a feeling, right? There's so much humanity in those photographs that he sent me. After I got the book, it's like this one moment in time that feels so special, and it's real, right? So you're looking at something that, this woman was walking around. She was a short story writer in the 1930s, and it was all there for her. Like, it was happening before her eyes. And, it's like, I always thrive off of looking at photography references because they're real people in real spaces. And that's what I'm doing. We're playing make-believe. Like, let's, just be real here. It's like, it's storytelling, but like, it's all make-believe. And I need to make it so real that you believe that it's true. Like, you believe Michael's two people. You believe he's a vampire. You believe Cornbread's out there. These have to feel like real people. And so if everyone's doing their job at a really high level, it does feel like that photograph. And so that's what I'm after. I'm trying to make it like as good as that photograph that Ryan was like, because that's what he liked about the photographs.
Yeah.
It was a world that, felt really like his uncle's world, when he was listening to the blues music on the porch.
Was it important for you to make an original story at this stage of your career with Sinners?
Yeah. I would say absolutely, man. And like, it was more like at this stage of my life, like, I work with a lot of my friends, and I could feel us all kind of like transitioning into like a different mode. Everybody's life was changing around me. Like, people who didn't have kids, man, having kids now, and they big, and they getting ready to start school, and they joining baseball teams, and taking piano lessons, and people buying minivans and shit. You know what I'm saying? So we got companies now, and we no longer like the youngest people in the room when we walk into it. And I realized, I had been making movies, for 12 years now, that had been, going into international cinemas, and I still hadn't done anything. That was like all me, and that scared me, bro. I had a conversation recently with Michael Fleming where I talked about that, but what scared me more was realizing that pretty soon I wasn't gonna be able to pick up the phone and call everybody who I want to make a movie with and get them to like fully commit, just because like the direction that their lives were going. You know what I mean? Like, people were starting to get offers to direct movies and different type of full-time positions. You know what I'm saying? Like, my picture editor, Michael Shara, who's cut all my stuff, his son's like I mentioned, man, joining a baseball team and like getting serious about it, and like it was starting to become so complicated that I kind of panicked a little bit. Realized I had this really cool story I wanted to tell, and realized Ludwig was free, and had Zenzi, my producer, and my wife call around and check on Hannah and Beekler, and my production designer Ruth Carter, costume designer Autumn Arkapaw, cinematographer, call in, check on them and see what their schedules were looking like, and I checked in with Mike B, and realized, man, we might have an opportunity to go, so we went, we went like a bat out of hell, bro. Like, I used to return kicks, like kickoffs when I played football. That was one of the things I was really good at. And like, I remember sometimes I would like think I saw something, like in the wedge. Like, sometimes somebody would slip.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Or,
there was a hole. A hole opened up.
Yeah. Well, it's not there yet, but I think it might be there. You know what I mean? And then you just gotta go. You know what I mean? Run like it's gonna open up. And that was what this process was, man. Like, and I picked just the right time where everybody could kind of run with me. I don't think it'll happen like this again, to be honest.
One thing I need to ask you about is you're one of the few filmmakers that I've talked to on this show who's under 40 years old who's directed 5 features that have been released in movie theaters. That is becoming a rarer thing. And I know theatrical is really important to you. How are you feeling about movie theaters, the movie-going experience, where it's at right now? Because there's been a lot of talk this year.
Look, man, it's just a subject matter I can't talk about without becoming emotional, bro. Look, man, when I was researching this movie, I found out that my grandmother, who's 96 years old, I found out what her first date with my grandfather was. Took her to the movies. He took her to the movies, and he tried to make out with her in the movie. And she told him, we can do that after. I'm trying to watch this.
You know what the movie was? What was the movie?
She couldn't remember. But she remembered the conversation she had with him. You know what I mean? And me and Zinzi, who's my producer on this, most important person in my life, our first date was to the movies. We went to go see Bring It On.
Oh, nice.
By Peyton Reed. Yeah, starring Gabrielle and Kristen Dunst. Yeah, like look, bro. For me, it's everything, man. My favorite cinema in LA has been closed since the pandemic. Man, ArcLight Hollywood.
So painful. Sucks here.
Yeah, man. I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for the experience of watching, these movies at a time when, I was pre-social media, man, when you couldn't get a movie spoiled before you 7 ways from Sunday. You know what I mean? And every time I set the camera up, bro, I'm thinking about the feelings that great filmmakers gave me, in my formative years and now. I love you. I think to quote a friend of mine, Miriam Bakabza, who I went to school with, it's a giant empathy machine. You know what I'm saying? I think it's best experienced with strangers, in the dark where you can't judge each other. You know what I'm saying? Even though it's getting incredibly expensive, but I'm making an IMAX film, man. This thing is gonna be on every PLF imaginable. You know what I mean? And like the cost, bro, coupled with inflation of taking a date to the movies, man. By the time you get your parking and your babysitter, you know what I mean, and all that stuff. I know it's substantial, but it still is such a democratized form of entertainment, man. You know what I mean? Like it was always the thing for the people, for the working man. You know what I'm saying? To go have a nice night out and travel somewhere and experience something. I'll fight tooth and nail to keep that around. You know what I'm saying? I don't know what I would do without it, to be honest with you. And I always consider myself fortunate that my movies have come out in theaters. It's really got nothing to do with me. It's just the timing, bro. Had Fruitville been made a calendar year later, we might be having a different conversation. Straight up. And I think about these things, man.